The throne room of the Crimson Sovereign stretched out like a cathedral made of metal and hatred. General Nathan Kane stood in the center, held upright by energy restraints that hummed against his wrists and ankles. Blood dried on his temple from the beating they gave him after capture. His uniform, once crisp and decorated with medals earned over 30 years of service, hung torn and dirty on his frame. Around him, representatives from 23 different alien species watched in silence. Some looked curious, others looked afraid. All of them were there because Emperor Zarthul commanded it. The Valkyran ruler sat on a throne that rose 3 meters above the floor, forcing everyone to look up at him. His scaled skin reflected the red lights of his flagship, making him look like something born from fire. Kane had been a prisoner for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of questions, torture, and mind probes. The Valkyran wanted to know where the human fleets were hiding, how many ships remained when the next attack would come. Kane told them everything they wanted to hear. He gave them fleet positions, ship counts, attack plans. Every single piece of information was a carefully crafted lie. The Emperor stood and the room fell into deeper silence. Cameras floated around the throne room, broadcasting this moment across every world in the Valkyran Empire. Billions of beings across dozens of star systems were watching. That was the point. That was why Kane was still alive after 3 weeks when most prisoners died within days. Zarthul spoke in the common tongue, the trade language that all spacefaring species learned. His voice boomed through speakers hidden in the walls. He talked about humanity's foolishness, their arrogance in thinking they could resist the Empire. He described the battles the Valkyran had won, the human colonies they had burned, the fleets they had destroyed. According to him, only 3 human battle groups remained, scattered and hiding in the outer systems. Kane listened without expression. Let the Emperor have his speech. Let him believe his own lies. The Valkyran thought they understood humans because they had fought them for 12 years. They thought they knew how humans organized their fleets, built their ships, planned their strategies. They were wrong about everything that mattered. The Emperor finally turned his attention directly to Kane. He walked down the steps from his throne, each footfall echoing. He stopped 3 meters away, close enough to see the defiance in Kane's eyes, but far enough to maintain the appearance of superiority. He asked Kane if he had any final words. It was meant to be cruel, a chance for the human to beg or plead or show weakness before the assembled species of the Empire. Kane lifted his head. His voice was rough from dehydration, but it carried clearly through the throne room. He said that killing him would not end anything. He said the Emperor did not understand what humanity really was. Humans did not need a single leader to survive. Humans did not collapse when they lost battles. Humans learned, adapted, and came back stronger. The Emperor was making a mistake, but by the time he realized it, the mistake would be fatal. Zarthul laughed. It was not a genuine laugh, but a performance for the cameras and the assembled ambassadors. He told Kane that brave words would not save him. He told the watching galaxy that humanity's resistance died here, in this room, with this man. He raised one clawed hand and gave the signal. A device descended from the ceiling, a Valkyran execution tool that used concentrated energy to stop all neural activity instantly. It was considered merciful by their standards. Quick, painless final. The device positioned itself above Kane's head. The general closed his eyes. He thought about his daughter Sophie, dead 15 years in a Valkyran raid. He thought about Captain Helen Morrison, who would be watching this broadcast from her cell somewhere on this ship. He thought about the fleets waiting in the darkness between stars, counting down the minutes until this exact moment. The device activated. Light filled the throne room for 3 seconds. When it faded, General Nathan Kane hung limp in the restraints. His life ended by the empire he had spent 12 years fighting. The restraints released and his body crumpled to the floor. Medical scanners confirmed death immediately. The Emperor nodded in satisfaction. Zarthul turned back to the cameras. He began his victory speech, the words he had prepared for this moment.
He talked about how this execution proved the Empire's dominance.
He invited the remaining human forces to surrender and accept Valkyran rule. He promised that resistance would only bring more death. He made it through 2 sentences before his military advisor rushed to his side. The advisor, a Valkyran general named Kratok, whispered urgently in the Emperor's ear. Zarthul's expression changed from triumph to confusion to something that might have been fear. He gestured sharply, and the broadcast cut off mid-sentence. The throne room erupted in controlled chaos. Valkyran officers shouted into communication devices. Holographic displays appeared in the air, showing star maps with red warning icons spreading across them like a disease. The assembled ambassadors looked at each other, uncertain what was happening but sensing that something fundamental had changed. In her cell 3 levels below the throne room, Captain Helen Morrison sat on the metal bench that served as her bed. The force field across her doorway allowed her to see into the corridor beyond. Guards ran past, their weapons ready but their targets unclear. She heard alarms, distant and growing louder. Something was happening, something big enough to make her captors forget about guarding prisoners. A Valkyran technician stopped outside her cell, his hands shaking as he worked a data pad. He was young, probably drafted into military service like so many species the Empire conquered. Morrison had learned some of the Valkyran language during her captivity. She asked him what was wrong. The technician looked at her with wide eyes. He said that human ships were appearing everywhere. Not just a few ships, thousands, tens of thousands, in star systems across the Empire all at the same time. Morrison felt something cold settle in her chest. It was done. After 3 months of planning, after Kane's sacrifice, after everything they had risked, Operation Burning Sky had begun. She asked the technician to show her the tactical display. He should have refused, should have kept the information classified, but he was too shocked to think clearly. He turned the datapad so she could see. The screen showed a map of Valkyran space. Red icons marked Imperial forces, blue icons marked human ships. The blue icons outnumbered the red by a factor of 5 to 1, and they were appearing in places that should have been impossible. The Second Fleet had materialized at Valkyran Prime, the Empire's homeworld. The Eighth Fleet was at Talcaris, the main military shipyard. Other fleets, some with designation numbers the Valkyran had never seen before, occupied positions throughout Imperial space. Morrison looked at the timestamp on the display. The human fleets had begun their attacks exactly 15 minutes after Kane's execution. Not before, which would have allowed him to die knowing the operation had started. Not after, which would have given the Valkyran time to recover from the shock. Exactly 15 minutes as planned. Kane had died on schedule, his sacrifice timed to the second. The technician was babbling now, switching between his own language and the common tongue. He said the human ships were using technology the Empire had never seen. Stealth systems that made them invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Weapons that cut through Valkyran shields like they were made of paper. Coordination that should have been impossible across such distances. How long had the humans been preparing? How long had they been hiding their true strength? Morrison did not answer his questions. She simply watched the display as the blue icons spread across the map, like dawn breaking over a planet's surface. The Empire had killed the human general. They had broadcast his execution as a symbol of their dominance. They thought they had won. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The stars were burning again, and this time the fire would not stop until everything the Valkyran Empire believed about the galaxy had turned to ash. 3 months before Kane stood in the throne room of the Crimson Sovereign, he sat in a different room entirely. This one was hidden deep in the Kuiper Belt, beyond the edge of human-controlled space. The facility was called Haven Station, though there was nothing welcoming about it. Cold metal walls, harsh lights, and the constant hum of life support systems created an atmosphere of permanent tension. The conference room held 32 people. They represented every major human fleet, every intelligence division, every branch of the military that mattered. Admiral Patricia Cole sat at the head of the table. She was 63 years old and had been fighting the Valkyran since the war began 12 years ago. Gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for never accepting defeat made her the obvious choice to lead this meeting. Kane stood at the front of the room, a holographic display floating behind him. The display showed the current state of the war. Red marked Valkyran territory, blue marked human space. There was far more red than blue, and the blue areas were shrinking month by month. To anyone looking at this map, the conclusion was obvious. Humanity was losing. Kane began his presentation. He said the Valkyran believed they understood the situation perfectly. They thought humanity had 3 main fleets, the 1st, 7th, and 9th. They thought these fleets were all that remained after years of brutal combat. They thought humanity's industrial capacity was nearly exhausted, that building new ships was becoming impossible. They thought victory was just a matter of time. The display changed. New blue icons appeared on the map, flooding the empty space between star systems. The 2nd through 6th fleets, marked as destroyed in official records. The 8th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th fleets, which had never appeared in any official records at all. Shipyards in dark space, the vast emptiness between stars where no sensors could reach. Production facilities that had been building ships for 8 years straight. Commander Jake Sullivan whistled low. He was 36, young for his rank, and commanded the 8th Fleet. His specialty was stealth technology, making ships invisible to every known form of detection. He said they had been busy while the Valkyrin thought they were winning. Kane nodded. That was exactly the point. While the Empire celebrated their victories, humanity had been preparing something they could not imagine. Kane explained. The plan he called Operation Burning Sky. The hidden fleets would position themselves throughout Valkyrin space over the next 3 months. The 2nd through 6th fleets would travel to the intergalactic void, the empty space between galaxies where nothing existed. The journey would take 3 months. They would wait there, invisible and patient. The 8th through 15th fleets would use their stealth systems to infiltrate Valkyrin territory, positioning themselves near key targets. But the plan required something else. It required the Valkyrin to believe they had won. They needed to capture a high-ranking officer, torture him for information, and execute him publicly. They needed to think they had broken humanity's spirit. Only then would they drop their guard enough for the full scope of Operation Burning Sky to work. The room went silent. Admiral Cole asked the question everyone was thinking. Who would volunteer for that? Who would accept capture, knowing what the Valkyrin did to prisoners? Who would die on camera to sell the deception? Kane raised his hand before anyone else could speak. The objections came immediately. Kane was too valuable. His tactical knowledge was essential. They could not afford to lose him. But Kane cut through the arguments with cold logic. He was 57 years old. He had no family. His health was declining from years of high-stress combat command. He would be dead from natural causes within 15 years anyway. This way his death would mean something. This way his death would buy victory. Dr. Gregory Walsh, the civilian scientist who designed the stealth systems, spoke up. He was 42, balding, and uncomfortable in military environments. But his mind was brilliant, and Kane trusted him. Walsh said they could prepare false intelligence for Kane to reveal under interrogation. Information that seemed valuable but actually misled the Valkyrin about fleet positions, ship capabilities, and strategic plans. Every piece of data Kane gave them would be one more thread in the web they were weaving. Kane agreed. But he made one condition that was not negotiable. Captain Helen Morrison had to survive. She would be captured with him, held separately, and she would be there to witness the counterattack. Someone had to carry the truth of what really happened. Someone had to remember that Operation Burning Sky was built on sacrifice, not just superior technology. Morrison stood up from her seat. She was 41, had served with Kane for 11 years, and knew him better than anyone in the military. She said this was insane. They could find another way. They did not need to sacrifice him. But Kane shook his head. They did need this. The Valkyrin would not believe humanity was broken unless they broke someone important. They would not drop their guard unless they thought they had won completely. The debate continued for 3 hours. Officers argued for alternatives. Cole suggested using a volunteer who was not as essential. Sullivan proposed a purely technological solution that did not require a sacrificial prisoner. Colonel Andrew Pierce, who led special operations, offered to go instead of Kane. But every alternative had flaws. The Valkyrin knew Kane by reputation. His capture would convince them in a way no other prisoner could. Finally, Admiral Cole called for a vote. The decision to proceed with Operation Burning Sky, including Kane's sacrifice, required unanimous approval from the fleet commanders. One by one, the officers voted, some quickly, others after long pauses. When the last vote was counted, the result was unanimous. Operation Burning Sky was approved. Kane would lead the 7th Fleet into a battle designed to end in his capture. The operation would begin in 3 weeks. The meeting adjourned. Officers filed out, some avoiding eye contact with Kane. They knew they had just voted to send a friend to his death. It was necessary, but necessity did not make it easier. Kane remained behind with Morrison, Cole, and Walsh. They needed to work out the details, the precise lies Kane would tell, the exact moment when the hidden fleets would reveal themselves. Walsh pulled up technical specifications on a smaller display. He showed them the modifications made to slip space engines. Human scientists had taken Valkyrin technology, studied it for years, and found ways to make it better. The new drives left no detectable signature. A ship could slip from one star system to another without alerting any sensors. The Valkyrin still used the old version of the technology. They had no idea humanity had improved it. Commander Lisa Chen, who oversaw the dark space shipyards, joined them via holographic communication. She reported that production was ahead of schedule. They had built 42,000 new ships in the last 8 years. Carriers, destroyers, frigates, and support vessels, all of them hidden in facilities the Valkyrin did not know existed. When Operation Burning Sky began, humanity would have the largest fleet in known space. Kane asked about the coordination systems. Attacking 15 targets simultaneously across light years of distance required perfect timing. Sullivan explained that they had developed quantum communication links that operated instantaneously, regardless of distance. The moment Kane was executed, every hidden fleet would receive the signal. 15 minutes later, they would drop stealth and open fire. The delay was deliberate. It gave the Valkyrin just enough time to start celebrating before the universe crashed down on them. The planning session lasted until late in the station's night cycle. When they finally finished, only Morrison remained with Kane. She tried one last time to change his mind. She said there had to be another way. He had given enough to this war. He deserved to see the peace they were fighting for. But Kane's expression was set. He told her about his daughter Sophie, killed 15 years ago when the Valkyrin attacked the outer colonies. He told her that every day since then had been borrowed time. He was ready for this. Morrison asked what she should do after Operation Burning Sky succeeded. Kane's answer was simple. Remember that victory came at a price. Do not let humanity become what they fought against. Build something better than just another empire. Make sure his death meant something more than just winning a war. Morrison promised she would. She promised she would survive, witness what his sacrifice achieved, and carry that message forward. 3 weeks later, the 7th Fleet engaged Valkyrin forces at the Arcturus Belt. The battle went exactly as planned. Kane made decisions that looked brave, but were calculated to fail. The 7th Fleet fought hard, making the Valkyrin work for their victory, but ultimately lost. Kane and Morrison were captured. The Valkyrin celebrated. Emperor Zarthul prepared his execution broadcast, and in the darkness between stars, 42,000 human ships waited for the signal that would change everything. The countdown to Operation Burning Sky had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. Admiral Patricia Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Washington. Around her, officers worked at their stations with focused intensity. Before her, the main display showed Valkyrin Prime growing larger as the 2nd Fleet dropped out of slipspace. They had spent 3 months traveling to the intergalactic void, and 3 months traveling back. 6 months of waiting in the cold darkness between galaxies, maintaining strict communication silence, wondering if the plan would work. The timer in the corner of the display counted down. 15 minutes since General Kane's execution, exactly as planned. Cole gave the order to drop stealth fields. In an instant, 3,000 human ships became visible to every sensor in the Valkyrin home system. The effect was immediate. Valkyrin defense platforms powered up weapons. Military ships broke orbit and moved to intercept. Civilian traffic scattered in panic. Cole opened a channel to the Valkyrin Defense Command. She identified herself and the 2nd Fleet. She said they had one chance to surrender before the shooting started. The response came quickly. A Valkyrin admiral named Torvund demanded to know how human ships had appeared without warning. The 2nd Fleet was supposed to be destroyed. Records showed they died at the Battle of Proxima 4 years ago. Cole smiled without humor. She said records could be wrong. The 2nd Fleet had been hiding, building strength, waiting for this exact moment. She gave the Valkyrin Defense Forces 10 minutes to stand down. After that, her ships would open fire and nothing in orbit around Valkyrin Prime would survive. The channel went silent. Cole knew they were frantically contacting Emperor Zarthul, trying to understand what was happening. At the same moment, 1,500 light-years away, Commander Jake Sullivan watched similar chaos unfold at Talcaris. His 8th Fleet had been hiding near the main Valkyrin shipyard for 6 weeks. His stealth ships had observed every ship coming and going, mapped every defense system, identified every weak point. The Valkyrin had no idea they were being watched. They had no idea death was waiting just outside their sensor range. Sullivan's ships dropped stealth and moved into attack formation. The shipyard was massive, capable of building 50 capital ships simultaneously. It was the heart of Valkyran military production. Destroying it would cripple their ability to rebuild after this war. But Sullivan did not give the order to fire immediately. He opened a channel and offered the workers a chance to evacuate. 30 minutes. Any ship that wanted to leave could do so without being attacked. The Valkyran military commander at Talcaris was named Rector. He responded with threats and demands. He said the 8th Fleet would be destroyed just like the others. Sullivan calmly pointed out that his ships had been watching the shipyard for 6 weeks. He listed the exact number of defense platforms, the rotation schedule of patrol ships, and the location of the station commander's private quarters. Rector went silent. The psychological impact of knowing he had been observed for weeks was devastating. Across Valkyran space, 13 other human fleets were having similar conversations. The 3rd Fleet appeared at the trade hub of Zendara. The 4th Fleet materialized near the military academy on Torval. The 5th Fleet positioned itself above the administrative center of Kalmora. Every target had been chosen for maximum strategic and psychological impact. The Empire was not just under attack. It was under coordinated, simultaneous attack by forces they did not know existed. On the Crimson Sovereign, Emperor Zarthul stared at displays that showed his empire falling apart. Reports flooded in from every corner of his territory. Human fleets everywhere. Thousands of ships. Technology that surpassed Valkyran capabilities. Coordination that should have been impossible across such distances. General Kratok stood beside him, his expression grim. He said what they were both thinking. The humans had been planning this for years. Everything the Empire thought they knew was wrong. Zarthul demanded options. Kratok had few to offer. They could call for reinforcements from their subject species. The civilizations the Empire had conquered over centuries. They could try to concentrate forces and defend the most critical systems. They could attempt diplomatic contact and buy time. But every option assumed they had time, and the coordinated nature of the attack suggested time was exactly what the humans would not give them. The Emperor tried to contact his subject species. The Kalari, aquatic beings who served as engineers, the Thos, insectoid workers who maintained infrastructure, the Prav, reptilian soldiers who reinforced Valkyran military. The responses were not what he expected. Some did not answer at all. Others gave excuses about technical difficulties. A few were honest enough to say they were remaining neutral. None offered the immediate support the Empire needed. Colonel Andrew Pierce was responsible for that. His special operations teams had spent 6 months infiltrating communication networks throughout Valkyran space. The moment Kane died, they began broadcasting a message. It explained Operation Burning Sky in detail. It showed that humanity had been preparing this counterattack for years. It offered every subject species a choice: remain neutral and be left alone, fight for the Empire and face human wrath, help the humans and earn their friendship. The message was carefully written. Captain Morrison had helped compose it during the planning phase. It emphasized that humans did not want to conquer anyone. They wanted freedom for themselves and were willing to help others find freedom too. But it also made clear that humanity possessed overwhelming force and would use it without hesitation against anyone who stood in their way. The balance between offer and threat was precise. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake managed communications for Admiral Cole's fleet. She was 32, brilliant with languages and diplomacy. 6 hours after the attacks began, she started receiving responses from subject species. The Kalari sent a message saying they would not interfere. The Thos went further, offering to share intelligence about Valkyran military installations. The Prav remained loyal to the Empire, but even they asked for time to consider their position. Blake compiled the responses and sent them to Cole. The Admiral studied them carefully. The Empire was not just militarily defeated, it was politically isolated. Without support from subject species, the Valkyran could not sustain a long war. They could fight for weeks or maybe months, but ultimate victory was impossible. The only question was how much damage both sides would suffer before the inevitable surrender. In her cell, Morrison watched as her guards abandoned their posts. The Valkyran crew of the Crimson Sovereign were more concerned with survival than guarding prisoners. She walked out of her cell without anyone stopping her. The corridors were chaos. Officers ran toward the bridge. Technicians tried to repair damage from warning shots human ships had fired. Civilians who served aboard the flagship searched for escape pods. Morrison made her way toward the bridge. She passed Kane's body in the throne room. The Valkyrin had left it there, forgotten in the crisis. She stopped for a moment, looking at the man who had sacrificed everything for this moment. She whispered a promise that he had not died for nothing. Then she continued toward the bridge. She arrived just as Admiral Cole's ultimatum came through. Surrender or be destroyed. Choose quickly. Emperor Zarthul sat on his throne, no longer looking like a ruler of galaxies. He looked like what he really was, an old warrior who had miscalculated badly and lost everything because of it. He saw Morrison enter and gestured for guards to seize her. But the guards did not move. They were too busy watching the displays that showed human fleets surrounding their positions. Morrison walked forward until she stood before the throne. She told the Emperor that General Kane's last words were true. The Valkyrin had killed one man and thought they won a war, but they never understood what they were fighting. They were fighting an idea, the idea that beings should be free, that no species had the right to dominate others. That tyranny would eventually meet resistance it could not overcome. Zarthul asked what humanity wanted. Total destruction of the Valkyrin? Revenge for 12 years of war? Morrison shook her head. Humanity wanted the fighting to stop. They wanted the Empire to end. They wanted every species in this region of space to have the chance to determine their own future. If the Emperor surrendered now, the killing could stop. If he chose to fight, humanity would reduce every military installation in Valkyrin space to debris. The choice was his. The Emperor looked at his displays one more time. 15 human fleets holding 15 critical systems, subject species refusing to help, his own military commanders admitting they could not win. He had ruled for 43 years, conquered species, expanded the Empire across dozens of star systems. All of it was ending because he underestimated a species he thought was primitive and weak. Zarthul gave the order to surrender. General Kratok objected immediately, saying they could still fight, still preserve Valkyrin honor. But the Emperor overruled him. Honor meant nothing if the species was extinct. He opened a channel to Admiral Cole and accepted her terms. The Valkyrin Empire laid down its weapons. After 12 years of war, the fighting was over. The stars had burned and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The surrender of Emperor Zarthul should have ended everything. The war was over. Humanity had won. But wars do not end cleanly, and 12 years of hatred do not disappear because someone signs a document. 3 days after the Emperor's surrender, Admiral Patricia Cole stood in a conference room aboard the Washington, facing a problem she had not anticipated. General Kratok, the Valkyrin military commander, refused to accept the surrender. He took 30 ships and 5,000 loyal soldiers to the fortress world of Karnoth, on the edge of Imperial space. From there, he broadcast his own message. He declared himself the true defender of Valkyrin honor. He said the Emperor was weak, corrupted by age and fear. The war was not over. It would continue until humanity was driven from Valkyrin space or every true warrior was dead. Cole read the intelligence reports about Karnoth. The fortress world was heavily defended with shields and weapons platforms. Attacking it would cost thousands of human lives and just as many Valkyrin lives. The planet itself housed millions of civilians who had nothing to do with Kratok's rebellion. A direct assault would create exactly the kind of massacre humanity claimed to oppose. Captain Helen Morrison argued for a different approach. She said General Kane did not die to replace one empire with another. Crushing Kratok through overwhelming force would prove that humanity was no better than the Valkyrin Empire. They needed to find a way to neutralize the threat without becoming the very thing they fought against. Some officers disagreed. Commander Jake Sullivan said mercy could be mistaken for weakness. If they let Kratok survive, other species might think humanity could be challenged. The debate continued for hours. Each side had valid points. Leaving Kratok alone risked inspiring future resistance. Attacking him risked killing civilians and proving that humanity's talk of freedom was empty. Cole listened to both arguments, then made a decision. They would neither crush Kratok nor ignore him. They would contain him and prove that humanity could protect its allies without resorting to genocide. While the military debated strategy, Dr. Gregory Walsh worked on something else entirely. He had been reviewing the intelligence Kane provided to the Valkyrin during interrogation. Walsh designed those false reports himself, encoding them with mathematical sequences that would mislead enemy analysts. But Kane had added something Walsh did not create. Hidden in the fake data was another code, one that required Kane's personal encryption key to unlock. Walsh spent 3 days breaking the encryption. When he finally succeeded, he found a message Kane had written knowing he would never deliver it himself. It was addressed to Morrison, Admiral Cole, and the other fleet commanders. The message was brief but profound. Kane wrote that he anticipated the exact debate they were having now. Victory would bring temptation to become what they fought against. His final order was clear: show mercy wherever possible, but never mistake mercy for weakness. Kane wrote that the stars burned not to destroy the Valkyrin, but to prove a principle. No species had the right to dominate another. If humanity forgot that principle in their moment of triumph, then his sacrifice meant nothing. He urged them to create something better than empire, build a coalition where species cooperated as equals, make the galaxy safer not through conquest but through genuine partnership. Walsh brought the message to Morrison. She read it twice, then asked for a meeting with all the fleet commanders. When they gathered, she shared Kane's final words. The room fell silent. Here was their friend and colleague speaking from beyond death, reminding them why they fought. Some officers had tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded. Kane always knew exactly what to say. Morrison proposed a new approach based on Kane's message. Instead of either crushing or ignoring the subject species of the former empire, humanity should offer them something unprecedented: true independence. She suggested forming a coalition of free systems. Every species would have equal voice. No one would rule others. Disputes would be resolved through negotiation and arbitration. Members would contribute to collective defense, but no one would be forced to fight against their will. The Valkyrin themselves would be invited to join on equal terms with everyone else. The conditions were simple: accept that the empire was finished, recognize the independence of former subject species, contribute to peace rather than seeking revenge. Any Valkyrin who wanted to join the coalition would be welcome. Any who chose to remain independent would be left alone as long as they did not threaten others. Admiral Cole approved the proposal and authorized Morrison to begin diplomatic outreach. The responses came quickly. 7 species accepted immediately. The Kalari, who had maintained Valkyrin technology for decades, were grateful to be free. The Thos, who had been conquered 200 years ago, celebrated openly. The Drayan, a feline species known for their art and culture, sent ambassadors within days. 5 other species joined during the first week. 8 species requested time to consider. They wanted assurances about security, trade agreements, and protection from species that might try to fill the power vacuum left by the Empire's collapse. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake worked with Morrison to address these concerns. They drafted treaties that guaranteed mutual defense and established trade relationships. They promised that humanity would help protect coalition members, but would not establish permanent military bases without permission. The Valkyrin civilian government, led by Councillor Ventara, cautiously expressed interest in joining. But Ventara could not speak for all Valkyrin. Millions still believed the Empire could be restored. General Kratok commanded loyalty from those who saw surrender as betrayal. The species was divided between those who accepted the new reality and those who wanted to fight until nothing remained. Kratok watched the coalition's formation from Karnoth and made a calculated decision. He could not defeat humanity militarily. His 30 ships were no match for the human fleets. But he could create doubt. He could make coalition members question whether humanity could truly protect them. He launched a series of raids on supply convoys traveling between coalition systems. The attacks were small, targeting civilian ships that carried food and medical supplies. Each raid caused minimal casualties but maximum fear. If humans could not protect simple convoys, how could they defend against serious threats? Kratok sent messages with each attack. He said the coalition was weak, built on empty promises. He claimed that only the strong survived in the galaxy, and the coalition proved humanity was not as strong as they pretended. Join the Empire's revival or face chaos when human protection failed. Morrison understood immediately what Kratok was doing. He was trying to force humanity into a choice between abandoning the coalition or committing to military occupation of former Valkyrin space. Either outcome served his purposes. If humanity abandoned the coalition, he could claim they were untrustworthy. If they occupied Valkyrin space, he could claim they were conquerors despite their words about freedom. The strategy was clever and dangerous. Morrison proposed a third option to Admiral Cole. Instead of abandoning the coalition or occupying territory, humanity should demonstrate protection through action. Form a multi-species task force that included volunteers from coalition members. Show that defense was a shared responsibility, not something imposed by humanity. Respond to Kratos' raids not with overwhelming destruction, but with precision and restraint. Make it clear that the coalition could defend itself without becoming tyrannical. Cole approved the plan and gave Morrison command of the task force. She named it Operation Starshield. Within 2 weeks, Morrison assembled ships from 7 coalition species. Human vessels provided the core strength. Kalari engineers integrated different technologies. Thus, scouts identified Kratos patterns. Drayan communication specialists managed coordination between species with different languages and customs. The force was small compared to the full human fleets, but it represented something more important than raw power. The first test came when Kratos raiders attacked a medical convoy heading to a Thos colony. Morrison's task force intercepted them mid-attack. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. Human ships disabled 3 raiders with precise fire. Kalari vessels used electronic warfare to blind the others. Drayan fighters herded the disabled ships away from the convoy. Not a single raider was destroyed. Not a single civilian died. The message was clear. The coalition could protect its members without unnecessary killing. Kratos tried again 2 weeks later, this time targeting a diplomatic ship carrying ambassadors between coalition worlds. Morrison's task force was ready. Commander Sullivan's stealth ships had been tracking Kratos' forces, predicting their movements. The task force arrived before the raiders did. When Kratos' ships dropped out of slipspace, they found themselves surrounded. Morrison opened a channel and offered them one chance to withdraw. They took it. Each successful defense added credibility to the coalition. Species that had been uncertain about joining became more confident. The number of members grew from 7 to 12, then to 16. The Prav, who had been loyal soldiers of the Empire, split into 2 factions. Half joined the coalition. The other half retreated to Karnath with Kratos. Even some Valkyran civilians began supporting Councillor Ventara's efforts to join the coalition, though full membership remained controversial. 3 months after the Emperor's surrender, Morrison stood aboard her flagship reviewing casualty reports from Operation Starshield. 12 coalition personnel wounded in various engagements. 0 killed, 47 of Kratos' soldiers captured and held prisoner, none executed. The numbers told a story about the kind of civilization the coalition was becoming. Kratos was losing not because humanity crushed him, but because his entire worldview was being proven wrong. Strength did not require cruelty. Defense did not require domination. The galaxy was changing, and General Kane's sacrifice had made that change possible. The asteroid came from nowhere. A mining accident on one of Karnath's moons knocked a massive rock off course. The trajectory calculations were immediate and devastating. In 72 hours, the asteroid would impact Karnath. General Kratos' fortress had shields powerful enough to survive. The military installations were safe. But the civilian settlements scattered across the planet's surface were not. 400,000 Valkyran lived outside the fortress. They had no shields, no bunkers, no way to survive the impact. Captain Helen Morrison received the alert 6 hours after astronomers detected the asteroid. She was aboard her flagship, reviewing patrol schedules for Operation Starshield. The moment she understood the situation, she knew what had to be done. She also knew it would be controversial. Karnath was enemy territory. Kratos had spent 3 months raiding coalition convoys. Many officers would argue that his civilians were not their responsibility. Morrison did not ask for permission. She diverted the entire task force toward Karnath and sent a priority message to Admiral Patricia Cole explaining her decision. The Admiral could overrule her, but by the time orders came back, Morrison's ships would already be in position. Sometimes forgiveness was easier than permission, especially when lives were at stake. The task force arrived at Karnath 18 hours before the asteroid. Morrison opened a channel to the fortress and announced her intention. She said the coalition would evacuate any civilians who wanted to leave. Transport ships were ready. Medical facilities stood by. The offer had no conditions. Civilians would be protected regardless of their loyalty to Kratos or their feelings about humanity. The only requirement was that they wanted to survive. Kratos' response was immediate and furious. He called Morrison a liar and a manipulator. He said this was a trick to infiltrate the fortress. He ordered his ships to intercept any coalition vessel that approached the planet. Morrison ignored him and spoke directly to the civilian settlements. She said transport ships were coming. Anyone who wanted to evacuate should gather at designated coordinates. The coalition would protect them from the asteroid and from anyone who tried to stop them. The first civilians began moving toward evacuation zones within an hour. Families with children, elderly who could not survive in bunkers, workers who knew the fortress shields would not cover their homes. Kratok sent soldiers to stop them, but the soldiers faced an impossible choice. Stop civilians from evacuating and watch them die, or let them go and admit humanity was more willing to save Valkyran lives than their own military was. Most soldiers let the civilians pass. A few actively helped, directing people to the evacuation zones and maintaining order. Kratok screamed orders over communication channels, but his authority was crumbling. Morrison's ships descended through the atmosphere and began loading civilians. Human crew worked alongside Kalari engineers and Thos medics. Species that had been enemies weeks ago now cooperated to save lives. Dr. Gregory Walsh worked from the Washington, coordinating the technical challenges of evacuation. Valkyran physiology was different from human. Their environmental needs varied. Walsh and his team modified transport ships in real time, adjusting atmosphere, temperature, and gravity to accommodate Valkyran passengers. It was difficult work under impossible time pressure, but it worked. Ship after ship lifted from Karnoth's surface, each carrying hundreds of civilians to safety. Admiral Cole arrived with reinforcements from the Second Fleet 12 hours before impact. She brought additional transport capacity and engineering support. She also brought a message for Kratok. The coalition was evacuating his civilians because it was the right thing to do. Not to make him look bad, not to gain political advantage, simply because 400,000 beings were about to die, and the coalition had the ability to prevent that. If he wanted to continue fighting after this, that was his choice. But he would do it knowing humanity valued Valkyran lives even when Valkyran military leaders did not. The evacuations continued until 2 hours before impact. The final transport lifted off with the last group of civilians. 400,000 beings saved. 0 casualties. The asteroid struck Karnoth on schedule, impacting 600 kilometers from the fortress. The fortress shields held as predicted, but the civilian settlements Morrison evacuated were obliterated. Without the coalition's intervention, everyone there would have died. Morrison requested permission to land on Karnoth. She wanted to meet with General Kratok face to face. Her security team objected. Admiral Cole expressed concern, but Morrison insisted. She had saved his people. Now she needed to finish what General Kane started. She needed to show Kratok that the old way was truly finished, and that the new way offered something better than endless war. Kratok agreed to the meeting. Morrison went alone against every security protocol. She took a shuttle to the fortress and walked into a room where a Valkyran general waited with his honor guard. Kratok could have killed her easily, but he did not. He asked the question that had been weighing on him since the evacuation. Why did she save his people when he had been attacking hers for months? Morrison's answer was simple and direct. She saved them because General Kane would have done the same, because humanity learned something from 12 years of war. They learned that becoming monsters to defeat monsters meant the monsters won anyway. The coalition was not built on revenge or domination. It was built on the principle that every species deserved the chance to choose their own path. Even Valkyran, even Kratok's people. She showed him data on the coalition's growth. 18 species had joined now. They were establishing trade networks, sharing technology, resolving disputes peacefully. Former enemies were becoming partners. The galaxy was changing not because humanity forced it to, but because beings everywhere were tired of the old way, tired of empires and conquest, ready for something better. Kratok listened without interrupting. When Morrison finished, he asked what would happen if he continued fighting. Morrison told him honestly. The coalition would defend itself. His raids would be stopped. Eventually, through attrition, he would lose. But it did not have to be that way. He could choose to be part of the future instead of the last defender of a past that already ended. The coalition would welcome him and his soldiers if they laid down their weapons. The general did not answer immediately. He dismissed Morrison and kept her waiting for 3 days. During that time, he consulted with his officers, spoke with the evacuated civilians, and watched recordings of coalition operations. He saw multi-species crews working together. He saw disputes resolved through negotiation. He saw a vision of the galaxy that the Empire never offered. Finally, he sent for Morrison again. Kratok said he would accept the coalition's terms. His soldiers would lay down their weapons. He would not join himself, but he would not interfere with Valkyrin who chose to. He asked for one thing in return: that the coalition remember that Valkyrin were warriors who valued honor, that they be treated as partners, not conquered subjects. Morrison agreed. The coalition was about equality, not charity. Valkyrin would contribute as much as they received. 6 months after General Kane's death, the Coalition of Free Systems dedicated a memorial in his honor. Haven Station, the secret facility where Operation Burning Sky was planned, became the site. Representatives from 23 species attended. Humans, Valkyrin, Kalari, Thos, Drayan, and 18 others gathered to honor the man whose sacrifice made their cooperation possible. Morrison, now promoted to Admiral, delivered the dedication speech. She talked about sacrifice and redemption, about the price of freedom, and the responsibility that came with power. She explained that the stars burned not as vengeance but as a warning and a promise. A warning to any who thought dominating others was acceptable. A promise to any seeking partnership that humanity would stand with them. The memorial itself was simple. A holographic projection showed the stars, with one point brighter than the others. It represented the moment Kane died and the hidden fleets revealed themselves. The display would run continuously, a reminder that great changes often came from great sacrifices. That principles mattered more than power. That the measure of civilization was not how effectively it could destroy, but how carefully it chose when not to. After the ceremony, Morrison stood alone at the memorial. She thought about the conversation she had with Kane before Operation Burning Sky began. His certainty that his death would matter. She realized he was right, but not in the way he expected. His death mattered not because it enabled military victory. It mattered because it became a symbol of what people were willing to sacrifice for principles larger than themselves. 1 year after Kane's execution, Dr. Walsh approached Morrison with another discovery. He had found a final layer in Kane's hidden message, time-locked to open exactly 1 year after his death. Morrison read it privately. Kane wrote about his daughter Sophie and how her death showed him that some things were worth any sacrifice. He wrote about the future he hoped to create, where no parent would lose their child to imperial ambitions. He wrote that he died with no regrets because people like Morrison would carry the vision forward. The message ended with Kane's final thoughts. The Empire killed the human general, but moments later the stars burned again, not with the fire of vengeance, but with the light of hope. That light would continue burning as long as people remembered that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when not to. Morrison read the message twice, then deleted it. Kane's words were meant for her alone. His public legacy was what mattered now. The coalition of free systems continued to grow. 23 species became 30, then 40. Trade flourished. Technology advanced through shared research. Disputes arose and were resolved peacefully. It was not perfect. Nothing involving dozens of species with different cultures and needs could be perfect. But it was better than what came before. Better than empire and conquest. Better than the endless cycle of war and revenge. Commander, Jake Sullivan established a joint military academy where officers from every coalition species trained. Together, Dr. Walsh led research initiatives that benefited all members. Colonel Andrew Pierce commanded a multi-species security force. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake became Ambassador Blake, representing humanity in diplomatic negotiations with species outside the coalition. Admiral Cole retired but remained an advisor, ensuring military and civilian leadership maintained balance. The galaxy watched this experiment with interest. Some species saw it as a model for their own regions. Others saw it as a threat to traditional power structures. But none could deny that something fundamental had changed. The old order of empires and conquest was fading. A new possibility was emerging. Whether it would succeed or fail depended on whether beings across the galaxy could remember the lesson General Kane died to teach. That the measure of civilization was not in how effectively you could wage war, but in how committed you were to building peace. Morrison returned to the memorial one final time before leaving Haven Station. She stood before the holographic stars and whispered a promise that she would continue building what Cain died to create, that she would never forget the price of the peace they now enjoyed, that she would make sure future generations understood that the stars burned not to destroy an empire, but to light the way toward something better. The light continued to burn, steady and bright, a beacon for anyone seeking a different path. The empire had killed the human general, but the stars they lit in response would burn for generations to come.